Communication climates are the emotional tenor of the relationship between two people. Communication climates either make relationships happy and something that nurtures both of us, or they make communication climate something that makes interacting with one another very aggravating. How we choose to communicate with others, the investments that we put into the communication climates, and the negativity that we emit into communication climates is a big part of the determinant of our relational satisfaction with that other person. In this short webcasted video, we're going to look at the theory of communication climate, kind of the history of the study of communication climate, and some different decisions, some different inputs that you can make into communication climates to make them more effective or more healthy. My name is Dr. Jason Stone. I teach communication skills to college students. This is a video accompaniment to Chapter 6 of my textbook, Creating Communication Competency, and this chapter is about communication climate. Let's begin. Communication climate is often described as the overall mood or the tenor in a relationship. Communication climate is often the underlying reason why some relationships nurture us and others irritate or damage us. Communication climate is broadly the general mood between you and the other person in that relationship. Certain communication climates are things that bolster us, and other communication climates are things that aggravate us. This next graphic is of a sound equalizer, and it allows the user to use the variables or to use the switches to manipulate the sound output. I think that that's a useful metaphor for thinking about communication climates. Just as you can manipulate the treble or the bass or the balance or the volume and produce a different sound, you can manipulate certain variables in a communication climate to produce a different communication climate, or potentially even to repair a communication climate that you may have inadvertently damaged. All interpersonal communication exists along a continuum. The messages either confirm us or they disconfirm us as individuals. We choose to communicate more often and more fully with individuals that provide confirming messages. If we are in a communication climate or in a relationship that is chock full of disconfirming communication, you can bet as rational actors, we will make fewer investments into that communication. Keeping in mind that most communication is either confirming or disconfirming, let's look at some specific examples of communication and how those might either contribute to a positive communication climate or potentially to a negative one. In the left-hand side of the table, we have disconfirming communication behaviors, and in the right-hand side of the table, we have some confirming communication behaviors. Evaluation, certainty, strategy, control, neutrality, and superiority all provide disconfirming communication into communication climates. Conversely, their opposites, or things that exist on the other side of the continuum, are description, provisionalism, spontaneity, problem orientation, empathy, and equality. Let's discuss each of these. Most of the next series of slides discuss those different communication patterns that we talked about in the previous slide. Remember, in any communication situation, we have a choice. We can either escalate a potential conflict or we can de-escalate the conflict. We can make a confirming or a disconfirming deposit into the communication climate. Let's look at that first metric, evaluation versus description. Evaluation might take the form of you are always late. You are always busy. Notice the judgment in the intonation. Notice the judgment in the syntax. Any sentence that starts with you automatically has the result of putting the person who's receiving the message on the defensive. Let's try that same sentiment or those same general kind of linguistic constructions, only let's eliminate the you language, and instead of evaluating the other person, judging the other person, let's describe their behavior. I thought the meeting started at 3:30 p.m. My calendar item says that that is the start time. Then if the other person looks at their watch and notices that they're 20 minutes late to the meeting, then it's on them. They can apologize, they can provide an explanation, they can reschedule, They can do whatever is appropriate in that context to smooth over their negative deposit into the communication climate. Another one, instead of maybe you're always busy, might be, it seems like there's a lot on your plate right now. So you're saying, well, hey, you got a lot going on. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to manage this or not. Again, we can show up and we can confirm the other person and value the relationship, or we can disconfirm the other person. Evaluation disconfirms and description confirms. You also have a choice in a communication situation whether or not you're going to control or manipulate others, or if you're going to try to collaborate and work together with other individuals. We speak with our industry partners quite frequently, and they universally report to us that they like to see our graduates collaborating and working with other team members to discover solutions to problems that need solved. If you're controlling and manipulating, you might come in and impose your solution. You might not have any regard for the input of others, and you might just come in and dictate, hey, this is how it's going to be. Conversely, if you're collaborating, you have many eyes trying to look at the problem from new directions, and you have many hands trying to craft a workable solution. So we look kind of theoretically at the difference between control and collaboration. Now let's look at a couple of statements that imply control and collaboration. Control. I went ahead and assigned action items to save time. Collaboration. I had some thoughts about this, but I wanted to make sure that we all weighed in first. So you can see there's a difference. If you're open to input, if you want others to weigh in, if you're hoping to arrive at consensus, that's collaboration, and that's not control. You may have an agenda, and you may very well push the group towards your solution, and that's just fine. The difference, though, is how people feel when they had some input in arriving at that decision. And if they feel valued, if they feel heard, if they feel like they collaborated in setting the metric or making that decision, there's going to be more support for using that metric as a key performance indicator or implementing that solution. Part and parcel with control and manipulation is usually being strategic. And are you going to be strategic, or are you going to be authentic and spontaneous? Let's look at a couple of examples of the difference between the two. Chess is about the most strategic game ever invented. If one person was to make 20 moves and the other person was to make 20 moves, they've already evaluated something like a billion potential combinations of moves that the two of them could have made, and that they evaluated something on the order of 10 to like the 8th power of different potential probabilities. Chess is a very strategic game. It involves a pretty simple pattern. I do something, you do something, I do something, you do something, then I take your piece. So typically in chess, we're taught to think at least 3 moves ahead. Most international grandmasters say that they look a minimum of 7 moves ahead, with some of them saying that they look even farther ahead than that, and maybe as many as 20 moves ahead. If you're 20 moves ahead in your conversation, you're being strategic, and you're not being authentic. Strategy hides your true motives, and you package information to get the result that you want. We call that equivocation, where you just give people partial information and you don't necessarily share everything. As opposed to being authentic, spontaneous, that's honest, respectful, direct. You use a lot of I statements. You ask for what you want and you say why it's important. Strategy. Do you have any plans for Friday? You notice that maybe they're going to ask you to do something for them if you say that you don't have any plans. As opposed to authentic and spontaneous, maybe you lead with that part that you were going to keep hidden. I need help moving a piano after work. Could you maybe give me a hand with that? Strategy. Do you ever do what you promised? I'm fed up. Authentic and spontaneous. Honey, please wake up and take the kids to school. Obviously very different. The next communication climate variable is neutral versus empathetic. And this one's maybe a little tricky. I think typically we think that being neutral is good. If something happens, we just don't have much of a reaction to it, and that's how we keep emotions potentially out of the workplace. Um, some examples of that: acting indifferent or impersonal, dismissing the other person's concern, or treating other people like a number, as opposed to empathizing, and that is to show verbal and nonverbal support, to listen actively and attentively, and to acknowledge difficulties. An example of that might be, "Oh wow, yeah, um, that's a tough recovery from that surgery. I'm, relieved to hear that it's going well." So again, neutrality is indifference, it's impersonal, it's a lack of concern, conveys that the other person's issue has very little value. As opposed to empathy, you try on the other person's shoes. How does it feel? Is there acceptance? Is there support? Are there feelings? Do you have issues? Do your words communicate that you see the other person? Those are dramatically important to making sure that you're approaching the communication situation and investing empathy as opposed to neutrality. Some examples. Neutrality. Yeah, that doesn't matter. The policy is the policy. There are no late papers. As opposed to maybe a more empathetic response. Oh, wow, that's a lot. I'm sorry you're going through that. Let's talk about some specific ways that I can support and help you to stay caught up and get caught up. You notice there's a very big difference between those two statements. You may not be able to demonstrate any flexibility, but that doesn't mean that you can't demonstrate some empathy. This next slide describes the difference between acting superior and regarding others as equals. When we send the message that we are superior to others, it's an automatically off-putting investment into the communication climate. Conversely, if we use we language and we treat others as having equal worth and value their ideas, that's a positive investment in the communication climate. I chose this next image because it's a pretty classic judgmental, sort of stance. These two gentlemen work security. That arm on the side, kind of cocked up like that. That typically signals standoffishness and judgment, and certainly communicates superiority. In addition to that, we see kind of a smug look on both of their faces. They're clearly indicating superiority. Superiority is condescending, might include ridicules or eye rolls or nonverbal communication that minimizes the other person. It may include a patronizing sort of one-up, and it certainly conveys that I'm better than you. An example of some communication that's just dripping with that superiority: "Move over, I'll fix this, sheesh." Equality. Sees worth, recognizes different strengths and weaknesses, respects, honors and values others for their contribution. An example potentially of some statements. No problem, I struggled that too when I first started. Let me show you what Maria taught me about that. So you're even, kind of lifting another person up as, somebody who coached you through that. We're all equal. We all, went through this. We all experienced it, and I learned how to deal with that from someone just the same way I'm going to teach you how to deal with that, because that's how we do things around here. Speaking of superiority, you remember from our discussion of nonverbal communication back in chapter 5, the amplitude of the chin conveys a lot in terms of superiority. And here we see three individuals, three males who are definitely demonstrating a lot of smug superiority. In fact, all three of these photos on Flickr were called smug. And it's all about, kind of that angle of the chin. If you've got that chin really high up and you're sticking your neck out like that, that communicates a lot of superiority and a lot of smugness. Superiority and smugness are also indicated by classic one-sided grins. That sort of wry grin where you just kind of give them a half smirk. That typically means that you know something that the other person doesn't. Usually means that you're judging the other person for not knowing that thing that you think that you know that they don't. The final dialectic that we're going to talk about along a continuum that impacts communication climates are acting certain or acting provisional. Acting certain usually means that you're overconfident. Acting provisional usually means that you're flexible. Provisional just means that you're open to whatever outcome presents itself. Being overconfident means insisting on what must be done right, insisting that things be done the way that you think that they should be done, refusing to change your mind or look at any evidence that contradicts your position, and intolerant of disagreement for your viewpoint. Typically, that's certainty as opposed to provisional. Provisional, you're open, you examine your views, you continue to look at the situation and evaluate new evidence as it becomes available. You use maybe language. I'm not sure that that would work. We could explore that further. You're not necessarily making a definitive decision right then. Just to expand upon that, some things that individuals high in certainty might say, my way or the highway. They might be sure that they're right, as opposed to provisional, and those folks are willing to change their stance if something is more reasonable or something would be more effective. Some examples of some certainty statements, I'm not hearing that, that won't work. Or a provisional statement, I'm not familiar with that, spin that out, explain that more please. And we can clearly tell that the person with the provisional mindset is open to the situation and is open to a problem sort of orientation towards the situation. The other person who's certain already has a solution, and they're approaching this situation from a solution orientation, not from a problem orientation. So all of the other metrics that we described in the previous slides are related to dialectics that happen within the communication climate of a relationship. All of those things exist along a continuum. When we make positive interjections into the communication climate, we elevate the communication climate. When we make negative introductions or interjections into the communication climate, we decrease the communication climate. This is also consistent with some of the stuff that we talked about in chapter 3 when we discussed uppers and downers and vultures. Clearly, we can identify downers and vultures as individuals who are making unproductive comments and unproductive contributions to their communication climates. In addition to those dialectics, we also have some relational dialectics that impact our communication climate and impact how we communicate with others and how we interact with other individuals. We have 3 of those different communication dialectics or relational dialectics listed on the slide there. The first one is autonomy and connection. And the example that we have there is a person who is seated on the beach and a person who is walking away from that person on the beach. Clearly, it looks like the person who's sitting down is making a bid to be more connected, and it looks like the person who is walking away is making a bid to be more autonomous. Sometimes we value our me time. Sometimes we value that connection with another person. Sometimes we have friends that we still consider to be close friends that we haven't had much of a connection with for quite some time. All of those are examples of this autonomy connection dialectic. And the autonomy connection dialectic plays itself out in relationships with family, with friends, and with significant others. The next relational dialectic involves predictability and novelty. And if you're a Gen Xer like me, you probably grew up watching a lot of Scooby-Doo. Regardless of who we encountered in all the various different episodes, it just seems like it was we always unmasked a middle-aged man that we were still deathly afraid of monsters. And typically the middle-aged man who had been dressing up as the specter or as the villain was usually someone that we had already met before, and was somebody that had been portrayed as being innocuous or harmless. So predictability is a big one from Scooby-Doo. And if you watched, by the time you watched, maybe 4 or 5 episodes, you should get to a point where you can pretty predictably say who the villain was, unless the episode was not predictable and was not formulaic. But most of them were. And this relates to relationships in that we like predictability, but we also like potentially novelty. We like to know what the other person is going to think, or what the other person is going to do, or what the other person is going to order. But we also like to mix it up a little bit. We like fresh things. We like new things. We like unpredictable novelty as well. The last relational dialectic is with openness and closedness. And in a lot of relationships, there's usually one partner who self-discloses a little bit more, and maybe another partner who self-discloses a little bit less. Those are two individuals who are navigating that openness and closedness portion of their relationship very differently. I have a little meme here. It says, I tried to keep us together. You were busy keeping secrets. So obviously, closedness, openness, both of you being on the same page about the level of openness that you're going to have in your marriage is remarkably important. This next graphic is of a drain or a water spout, if you want to invert it. Basically, it could also be a tornado, if that makes more sense to you. Anyway, it's a funnel that starts off kind of larger and that works down into a much smaller area, into a much smaller singularity. And that will be helpful in interpreting the next couple of slides. Listed there to the left, we have an upward spiral of potential emotional states and emotional frequencies. There to the right, we have some different emotional states and some different emotional frequencies. If we think of each of these emotional states and emotional frequencies as potential things that we are adding into a communication climate, I think that this graphic is really, really helpful. If we are communicating that we are content, we're happy, we're not concerned about anything. We're hopeful about the future. We're optimistic about that future. We have a positive expectation that it's going to be good. We don't just believe that it's going to be good. We have an expectation that the future will be positive. We're enthusiastic. We're passionate about that. We allow our joy, knowledge, empowerment, freedom, love, and appreciation to show forth. Those are all remarkably positive contributions to a communication climate. Let's contrast that with, I'm bored. I'm pessimistic. I don't think that's going to go very well. I'm frustrated. I'm overwhelmed. I'm disappointed. I doubt that. I worry about this. I blame you. I'm discouraged. I'm angry. I would like revenge. I have hatred for those other people and I want to rage. I'm jealous. I'm insecure. I'm unworthy. Fear, grief, depression, powerlessness, victimhood, victim claiming. You see how exhausting all of those things are? It was, difficult for me to, even say some of the words, here and there, because they were such unpositive potential contributions into our communication climate. There's been some research on emotional frequencies. There's been some research lately about trying to measure some of these emotional frequencies. There's also been some research done by a couple of researchers in Japan about how emotions and the expression of emotions impacts water and impacts something as innocuous as rice. I continue to look for information that describes actual frequencies, and if some of that becomes more available, I will upload that as a supplement to this lecture. Based on some graphics displayed here, we see things that at the bottom of that list: shame, guilt, apathy, grief, fear, pretty consistent with some of the things that we talked about in the previous slide. Enlightenment, authenticity, peace, joy, love, reason, acceptance are all much higher vibrational states. It's good that we've already discussed emotions. Many of these emotions that are above the line: hopefulness, calm, opinionated, serene, all the way up to authenticity and unconditional love. Those are positive investments in communication climates. And obviously, boredom, apathy, depression, anxiousness, low self-esteem, victimhood, shame, guilt, apathy. These are negative interjections into communication climates. And clearly, there's a lot of information about vibrational frequencies available on the internet. That is something that some behavioral scientists, researchers, and some psychologists are starting to look at more closely. Something, though, that is not debatable are some of the results that have been published by Dr. Masaru Emoto in Japan. And he conducted the famous rice experiment, which has been replicated thousands of times at this point. He cooked one batch of rice, and he separated the rice into two different containers. Into one of the containers, he shouted words of affirmation. I love you. You're beautiful. This is the most delicious rice in the world. I can't wait to eat you. You're awesome. Anyway, words of affirmation. Into the other container of rice, he made negative communication climate investments. You disgust me. This is awful. You don't taste good. I'm not looking forward to eating you. So he invested one with love and gratitude, and he invested the other with hate and with fighting words. And the results were really phenomenal. The rice that received the positive communication climate affirmation appeared to be edible for up to months. It didn't appear to spoil. It didn't look like it was bad. Conversely, the rice that he shouted all of the insults into withered and turned black and looked inedible almost immediately after it had an opportunity to oxidize for about 24 hours. So pretty dramatic results. Dr. Masaru Emoto continued to study this phenomenon and concluded that for the most part, rice is 80% water, and most of the impact had actually been as a result of the communication's impact on the water itself. So these are the Japanese emotion rice experiments or emotion water experiments, but you're welcome to check that out and look at it. It's also interesting that as a human, you are more than 98% water. And if the water in the rice is vulnerable to being spoiled by negative communication climate interjections, I wonder how vulnerable as a human you are to those same communication climate interjections, whether they be positive or negative. In short, who we're around, who we allow to communicate with us, and how we allow them to communicate with us could potentially have some dramatic impacts on both our mental and physical health. Make sure that you value your communication climates. Make sure that you ensure that other people around you who have a lot of access to you are valuing your communication climate. Try to do your best to make positive contributions. Other people will follow suit. Some people don't know how to make good contributions to communication climates because nobody's shown them yet. So be that change, be that positive communicator in your life and in the lives of someone else.